the vascular surgeon. He was a department chair for a very, very big hospital in Cambridge, right, Doc? Right. Right? Give him a big round of applause, Dr. Hood. Come on, you guys. Appreciate that.
Oh, you good? Okay. I guess I'm wired today. Good morning, everybody. I wanted to, usually I start my talk out with a disclaimer, but there's no disclaimer today. Today there is a profound thank you to George, to Mr. Oda, to Mr. Higa, to Lou, to all the folks who have invited me here. I'm truly honored to be here. And most of all, I want to thank all of you in the audience, because I've had such a dynamite welcome. I'm really touched. I really am. Anyway, here it goes. Oh, I guess it doesn't. Oh, do I have a flicker?
Yeah, coming in.
Okay.
Here you go. Just that one. To advance.
Forward. Yeah. Okay. You know, as a doctor of medicine, I am a surgeon, and we're a little different. We don't prescribe pills. We operate on you, and then we heal you, and you're gone, and you live happily ever after. So we tend to be much more pragmatic, and if something works, we embrace it. And this is how I got into the water, because it worked for me, and I've embraced it. And I've embraced it because this is indeed a game changer, as George says, and it is indeed the future, because of a variety of reasons, which I will get into later. But my background is up here. I am not going to belabor the point. I was simply lucky. I'm an immigrant to this country. I didn't have anything, and I was a good student, and as a result, after I graduated from the University of North Dakota, the dean asked me to apply to Harvard Medical School, and I got in. So the fact is, following that, I did my internship. I got drafted to the Vietnam War and then finished my training, and from the day I finished my training, I had a job at the Cambridge Hospital and went from there to, from the lowest form of life to the chief of the department. In any case, my training was at a time when surgery was, in my opinion, at really the zenith of its development. It absolutely was wonderful to see the first heart valves put in, and to see how coronary bypass operations turned from a major production into a 1 hour affair. But in any case, I've had a great ride as a professional in surgery and vascular surgery. I've always been in active practice. I've always operated, and my great joy in my life has been the ability to teach young doctors to become surgeons. And that's meant more to me than anything else. And in some respects, cost me one marriage, but anyhow, it was my passion, and I make no mistake, no excuse for it. But in any case, how did I get into Kangen water? Well, it was an unusual thing. I operated on a fellow in Bullhead City, a fixed aortic aneurysm, and it turns out he was from North Dakota. And at the same time, when I was in school, he was in school at the University of North Dakota. Didn't know each other, but so we had sort of a bond, and I require the patients that have stent grafts to stick around for a week. They go home the next day nowadays after aortic surgery. And so he lived in Las Vegas. I said, stay at my house. And he brings this machine and gives me the water. Well, I will tell you, I've told you yesterday, Germans don't drink water. I'm sorry, but we don't. We have other liquids that we enjoy. And, first of all, the taste of the chlorine. I can pick that up. I have very good taste buds because I fancy myself to be a pretty good connoisseur of wine and stuff, so you gotta have the right kind of taste buds. And so I didn't drink water. And I drank this stuff, and I drank a liter. And I said, my goodness, it went right into me. And I liked it. Now, I bought a machine 2 days later, and the rest sort of is history. Because of that, I got interested in the product. I got interested in why it works. And the explanations that I read in conjunction with, you know, the brochures and what have you, didn't totally satisfy me. So what I did was a literature search. I did some of the NIH literature search engines, and then I got all these Japanese publications, and then of course you go on Google, and the first thing it says, Kangen water is a scam. You know, it's a scam. It's no damn good, and you're a snake oil salesman if you believe in it, and so on. And I always have the feeling when there are people that are vehemently against something, they're probably against it for, you know, reasons that are not entirely genuine. Having said that, I always do this. Having said that, I developed my own way of thinking about the water, and I made an effort, successfully I think, to connect that to hard science, reproducible, solid peer-reviewed journal publications that say why it works and how it works, and also finding out in the same process that this is now an ongoing subject of research in the allopathic Western medicine community. The water, ionized water, not specifically Kangen necessarily, but ionized alkaline water is now a huge subject of research being done. And by next year, you're going to have many publications that will validate what I'm saying. Now, we always talk about Otto Heinrich Warburg. It turns out I've become extremely fond of this man because of his incredible versatility. At one time, he was a chief of marine biology in Italy. You know, he had a career as a cavalry officer. He you know, was an incredible swordsman and an incredible writer, and it was a lifetime friend of Albert Einstein's, who dissuaded him from staying in the cavalry and getting out before World War I was over and going back to the laboratory, because that's where obviously he made a contribution unlike almost anyone. He got one Nobel Prize, he actually got two, but the Nazis would not let him leave to go to Sweden, so he couldn't accept it. In any case, he proposed this concept of alkalinity being a favorable state for cellular metabolism, as opposed to acidity, which is generated by cancer cells and allows them to live in an environment that the normal body fluids, etc., cannot get to, and that's how they proliferate and ultimately invade our body. Now, there's much more to that, and there's a different talk that I have specifically relating to cancer, but suffice it to say, this concept of alkalinity took root as being a good thing. Now, subsequently, we find out that alkaline water has beneficial effects on the outside of our body. And I consider the gastrointestinal tract to be outside of the body, right? It's a hose that goes from here to you know where, and it is really outside of the body. But we pass things through there that we absorb, that produce energy, that produce minerals, whatever, that enter our stream to replace our mitochondrial and cellular metabolism. And alkalinity neutralizes a lot of toxins within the GI tract, and that's a good thing. But most importantly, the alkaline state can help to buffer the pH in the cell. And this is huge because this has not been proven before. And the research done now on animal models, which are made profoundly acidotic. Now, when I say profoundly acidotic, that's from a pH of 7.4 to 7.2. That's profoundly acidotic, because 7, you're dead. So that's the narrow range. But the bone is the big buffer for our pH in the cells. Now we find out that when people are profoundly acidosis, like in chronic renal failure, in this case they tied off the ureters of the animals, so made them acidotic, and all the researchers gave them was alkaline ionized water, either by mouth through the GI tract or injected intraperitoneally as like in peritoneal dialysis. and the acidosis was corrected in minutes, much more quickly than it would be in the standard way, which is sodium bicarbonate and all kinds of injections. And this is published in the Journal of Therapy, Apheresis, and Dialysis, June 2009. You can just get it online. You just Google, just type in www.pubmed, and you can get that article downloaded in the form of an abstract for nothing. Now, Warburg showed one thing, and that is that cancer cells, what have I done now? Uh-oh. I'm back. Cancer cells, tumor cells, have a block in the utilization of oxygen. And as such, they ferment the glucose and produce very, very little energy. Right here, ATP, very little. Oxidative phosphorylation produces huge amounts of energy, and this factor, M2PK and tumor M2PK, are coenzymes and enzymes that promote the reaction. Now, Warburg had something. He knew about this factor. It was not until a year and a half ago that this factor was elucidated fully at my alma mater at Harvard University. And what this means that we now have an additional tool in which to get cancer-fighting drugs made, and that's thanks to Otto. So his contribution lives. Now, the second noble truth I refer to is microclustering, because the concept has been widely touted, but the proof has really never been there, including in Japan. Nobody's ever been able to say that this is absolutely real. Well, the answer is it is, and I will tell you why. If you take the surface tension of normal water, little bugs and crawly things can walk on it. When you look at a full glass of water, you can fill it to the point of being overfull. There's what is called a meniscus. You can see that. When you do the same with 9.5 pH Kangen water, you will have no meniscus, and that bug will drown because the surface tension is so much lower. Now, that's no proof, but that is an inference that the molecular structure is different, right? So now, the next thing that you can do, particularly analyzing with nuclear magnetic resonance, you can extrapolate the size of molecules by the bandwidth that's reflected in measured in hertz in a nuclear magnetic resonance test. And it is found that in nature, in normal water, from a stream, from a tap, or what have you, there's a huge variation in bandwidth in the molecule size, anywhere from 2, that's called dimers, to 128 or more. When you do the NMR, tap water resonates at 130 hertz. Micro water, alkaline water, at 65. Clearly indicating a much smaller molecular structure. Now, water gets into your body in a passive way. Almost all other things, sodium, potassium, bicarbonate, they have pump mechanisms, enzymatic mechanisms that actually have an active transport. Water has to flow into your cells. And in 2003, McKinnon and Agre discovered a gene, which is an RNA coil, that goes through the cell wall into the cell. It's fixed, and it's called an aquaporin. They received the Nobel Prize for that. And it is probably linked to some of the problems that we have with type 1 diabetes. And it looks something like that. This is Peter Agre's certificate from the King of Sweden, the Nobel Prize. And this is the little concept that they put on this, which is your cell membrane and the opening, the aquaporin, and the water molecules going through. Here's another description of that, cartoon, I guess you call it. And you have the large aggregates and the small aggregates, and you can clearly see why this aquaporin and why the microclustering is of benefit. It's like throwing a golf ball versus a tennis ball at a chain link fence.
Did you see type 1 diabetes, not type 2, type 1 diabetes?
Type 1, yeah. Type 2 is a different disease. In any case, the third noble truth I refer to is the antioxidant properties. Basically, antioxidants are molecules that prevent oxidation. They will be able to give up an electron to an electron-deprived atom to stabilize it. Free radicals are the things that do damage to our cellular structure. Everything in our cellular lining is negatively charged normally. The red cells are negatively charged, as is the lining of your blood vessels. If they weren't, you would have clumping and attraction, and you wouldn't get blood flow, you'd get blood clotting. Antioxidants remove free radicals. That is established in the literature for 25, 30 years. And we have examples of, vitamin C, fruits, vegetables, and so on, that are great antioxidants, and therefore nutritionists encourage you to eat those kind of foods. But nothing compares with the reduction of oxidation potential of Kangen water. It is dramatically higher, and it is measured in millivolts, and we've all seen the chart, and I guess I'm going to have it here. But first, a normal oxygen atom is stable. When it becomes positively charged, it sets up a chain reaction which damages cells. And the cellular damage, when it occurs right here, needs to be repaired. And it's the repair process that causes a lot of issues and disease. The most important one of which is in arteries. You have an artery that's been injured by free radicals. As a result, if there aren't enough antioxidants and so on to neutralize them, once the injury occurs, there's a need for repair. This is your red blood cells, this is the basement membrane, this is the disruption. Platelets come in and plug the hole so that there is no further erosion. And then macrophages and other scavenger cells come in. But the byproduct of the repair is fatty deposits in your artery. And once you have one of those, you have a propensity to get more, because once you have an elevation in the flow surface, you have shear stresses, and shear stresses can cause further injury. And the next thing you know, this artery can occlude, and that's what you have. You have claudication in your legs, or you have a heart attack, and depending upon which it is, it will determine the severity of the heart attack. If it's in your left main coronary, they call that the widowmaker. Most people die from a heart attack like that. If it's in left anterior descending, you've got a 75% chance of survival. ORP, here it is. Look at Kangen water. I have measured my own from my own machine. I get up to 600. And this is, of course, green tea and your fruit. And so the impact of the antioxidant properties is absolutely profound. And it leads us to the next issue, which is huge. Cancer is a huge health problem in our country. I mean, let's be clear. The commonest cause of death in the United States and all of Western Europe is heart disease. But next door is cancer. And cancer treatments were always based on the fact that you should not take antioxidants just in case that might affect the drugs. Well, it turns out that in Science Daily, in 2007, 850 articles were reviewed where patients were taking chemoradiation, different types of modalities of chemotherapy, and were taking antioxidants. And the idea was to determine whether or not there was a harmful effect from what the practice actually was. Is that real
harm by taking antioxidants? And the answer is unequivocally no. Antioxidants can be taken without ill effects when you're on chemo and radiation. And that is a profound difference because it tends to make people feel better. Also, recent evidence, specifically in ovarian cancer, suggests strongly that if people are on high-dose antioxidants, there is a bias towards better results on the antioxidant side. So this is ammunition that you have at your disposal because you might call on some MD and you say, oh, you know, you can't take antioxidants with chemotherapy, blah, blah. The answer is wrong. You can. And it's proven, it's incontrovertible, it's scientific data, hardcore. And that's a good thing for you to know. Now, there's a couple of things I want to quickly run through. I call them medical conditions requiring fluid restriction. I don't know what the newer brochures are like when you get your machine in the box, but the one I got was sort of semi-unreadable, but it said if you have trouble with the kidney, don't drink the water. Well, that's not entirely correct because the water really has nothing to do with kidney. The issue with kidney disease, congestive heart failure, and chronic obstructive lung disease is that they frequently require fluid restriction. Because if the body is overloaded with fluid, the lungs can't pump out the fluid into the left heart, and you get an extreme, what is called pulmonary edema, and it can kill you. So, some diseases you need to know about require fluid restriction. So if their prospect wants to buy a machine to help his chronic renal failure, it doesn't mean he can't buy the machine. It doesn't mean that the water is contraindicated. It means he has to follow the regimen of how much he can drink, or she. So anyway, coronary artery disease, the heart phase. We have a measurement, we do it by ultrasound. It's called the ejection fraction. When you're normal, it's 65% plus or minus 2. When it's really, really bad, it's 12 or 13%. And the workload of the heart is increased the more fluid you drink, the more fluid it has to pump. Those people need fluid restriction. Okay? And it's variable depending upon the degree, but if they've ever had an episode of pulmonary edema, you have to be very careful. That is just a rundown of a chart that essentially tells you that when you have chronic heart failure, the body's own mechanism, in a way, works against it because it shuts down excretion of urine through the angiotensin system. So you got to be careful. These people need to be on diuretics and so on. It's not important to know all the steps. It's important to know that there is a limit of the amount of liquids people could drink, water or anything, because of the increasing workload it's putting on the heart. And basically, this is just a depiction that shows you that an old heart has thick, healthy muscle. A sick heart is stretched out and thin muscle, and therefore cannot squeeze out as much of a pulse, volume, or systolic volume as a normal heart can. Now, the same thing is true of obstructive lung disease, except that affects the right heart, and the right heart is a low-pressure system. Your pulmonary circulation, your blood pressure is 40, as opposed to 120 on the arterial side. And so when the lungs get diseased, and of course in our civilization here, it's cigarettes that cause most of the damage. There's increased resistance to flow because of scarring, and then the pulmonary artery pressure rises. We call that pulmonary hypertension. And when it gets to a certain point that the heart really can't keep up with it, pulmonary edema results again, and people go into failure and they can die. And therefore, fluid restriction may well be necessary as part of the therapy for this condition. It is just the same kind of, cartoon telling you what causes all cigarette smoke, occupational things, dust, and so on, and some diseases, particularly some fungal diseases. And then finally, we have renal failure. I get the most questions from from enagic compliance about renal failure. There's two kinds, high output and low output renal failure. There are people whose body cannot be cleared of all the poisons, but they still make a huge amount of urine, but it's extremely dilute. The concentrating ability is gone. Now those people are lucky because they can pretty much drink as much water as they want, but that's rare. The commonest cause is olivuric renal failure, and the output of that kidney is fixed for anywhere from 1,000 cc's to 300 cc's. And based on that, you need to consult with the nephrologist or with the physician as to how much this individual can drink a day. And they're very strict about that because they weigh people before dialysis and after dialysis and so on. But again, it isn't an absolute contraindication. It is a relative contraindication as far as volume is concerned. We divide renal failure in three segments, and that is pre-renal, from the blood flow. There's not enough blood flow to the kidneys. It can't work efficiently. It can't filter efficiently. And then we have intrarenal, glomerulonephritis, pyelonephritis, obstructive diseases of the kidney. And then post-renal, which are obstructing the outflow either at the ureteral level or even at the bladder level. There are people with long-standing prostatic hypertrophy who go to renal failure because their system is always under pressure and it dilates and eventually fails. Now, in end-stage renal disease, the glomerular filtration rate is so low that you basically poison your own body, and then dialysis or transplant may be appropriate. This is sort of what end-stage kidney looks like. It kind of is nasty. I have a few recommendations. Feel free to ask me any other questions, but I wanted to make sure that because of what I've learned in answering questions from distributors and patients and whatever, that the single most important thing to me is make sure you know what is the expectation of your client, of your prospect. Because if they want to be saved, like they're going to Lourdes and be restored to normal health, it's not going to happen. And then they will be angry, buyer's remorse, and they'll be upset with you, and you sold me whatever. And don't give medical advice. And by that, I'm serious. It's perfectly okay to cite certain testimonials. It's perfectly okay to say, well, we have had reports that many patients have lost their eczema or their headaches, or well, Fred Brown's hair grew back, right? So that's all right to say, but you have to be accurate and make sure that you state that this pertained to an individual as opposed to being a general policy or a general statement about the water. And don't suggest that it cures it. Cure is a complicated thing. When people say to me, well, I was cured of stage 4 cancer, I guarantee they do not know what stage 4 cancer is. And the things that I've seen where I've actually gotten a pathology report associated with the stage 4 cancer claim is just not true. At stage 2 cancer, which is 85% curable for that particular cancer, there are 1,200 different cancers that we classify. And so when you're talking stage 4 cancer, it's a generic term that is meaningless unless you know exactly what it is. Now, I like to emphasize the concept of wellness, and that's what Wade does. And Wade says to you, you've got to keep well by preventing your body from getting into trouble in the first place. I mean, I know I don't do that, but I'm working on it. Now, the most important thing, though, is we need to live a healthy lifestyle. You know, 458 before the Christian era, Siddhartha Gautama said, everyone is responsible for their own health and diseases. And by that he meant, you know, treat your body like a temple, and you'll do well. And, you know, good Buddhist advice. Well, finally, educate yourself about the product and educate yourself about the competition's product. because you really want to know what you're selling, why you're selling it, why it is better, why it is not, you know, a Yugo, it's a Cadillac that you're selling. You're selling the best. And when in doubt, ask the experts. I promise you, I answer my emails and I answer my calls, and I'll be happy to talk to you anytime. And I mean, this is redundant. Basically, know your competition, and you must be convinced, and you must live it, that Enagic makes the best machine on this planet, and we must be able to show this to our prospective customers. And finally, make everything in this life as simple as possible.